How's it going, YouTube? Sliptide here, and we are finally getting to the desk and the DAW. So I'm going to read off my little notes here because otherwise I'm going to ramble and it's going to be a pain to edit the footage together. So it's the very few of you who've followed so far know that last year I did a lot of like DIY home improvement type videos talking about the space and everything. We're finally getting to what's on the desk and what's in the DAW, and my computer fans are really loud, so hopefully that doesn't get picked up on the mic too much. So first I'd like to cover what's on the desk. We've got MIDI equipment, we've got some synthesizers, we've got, a drum machine, an interface, all things that are physical devices on the desk. Then we can talk a little bit about, my notes say, a little bit about MIDI routing and audio routing before we get to the DAW, which is Ableton Live and Reason, both of them. And then I want to cover a little bit about how I got here. So what did my first setups look like? We could talk a little bit about that. Maybe I'll flash some pictures up on the screen of old gear, and kind of talk about what I used to do and how I got started doing this, and kind of how well it's working for me today and why I have it set up the way I have it set up. So I'm going to reposition the camera and then let's get started. So what we have going on right here is a collection of gear over the years, the last, I don't know, I can't even tell you how long. I'm not one to cycle in and out a lot of instrument voices at this stage of my career, and I much prefer to have what I have to help develop the sounds and the music that I'm trying to write. And here's where I've landed for the last while. So let's check it out. First, I want to cover the MIDI gear, the MIDI controllers that are on or in this setup. So we've got two Novation Launchpad Pros. We've got two Novation launch controls. We have the Arturia key step. And then back over here, which I think you can see it pretty well on that camera up there, this is an old iPad and it's running touchosc. So this is a custom touchosc template that I mold based on my needs. And it helps me get visual feedback from the DAW, as well as provide touch control for various pieces of the DAW, so I don't have to go and click around or use the kind of finicky touch screen on my Windows laptop. Yes, I do run Windows, and we're going to get into that. So that's really it for MIDI controllers. So for hardware synths, I've got the Electribe EA1, so the old school EA1 from Korg. We've got the StrikeFET string synthesizer, I trip up on that all the time. The Volca Sample 2, the Volca FM, the Volca Bass, the Volca Keys, and the IK Uno. And last but most certainly not least, the TR-8S. And the TR-8S not only does 90% of the drum work, it is also the master MIDI clock for this whole thing. So we've covered the MIDI gear, we've covered the instruments. Oh, there's one more piece. Underneath the TR-8S is the Tascam Selisonic US 2020. This is my audio interface. I'll splash a picture up on the screen because you can't really see it from either of the cameras. But this is a good way to get into talking about our routing that we have going on here as I bump my keyboard. So the TR-8S is the master MIDI clock for this whole setup. It controls the MIDI timing and the start and stop for all of these instruments, as well as all of the virtual instruments in the DAW that we'll get to. So the master MIDI clock, or the MIDI out from the TR-8S, goes into the Selisonic 2020, the Tascam interface I have here. And then from there, the Tascam passes MIDI out to a device I have down here, which is kind of hard to see on the camera there. This is the Banana Split. It's a 1 MIDI in, 6 MIDI out MIDI splitter. And it provides MIDI for all of the hardware synthesizers in my setup. I actually have a free spot in here because the StrikeFET is using USB MIDI, and the Uno also is using USB MIDI. And I believe that's it. The rest of them are using classic MIDI pin connections. All the Korgs are, and I feel like I'm missing one. Nope, it's just all the Korgs. So that's how the MIDI is routed right now. Oh, the key step is also using USB. So that's how the MIDI is routed. And then obviously, you know, we'll have stuff to talk about in Ableton Live. On the audio side, we have all of the physical inputs for the instruments right here going to the Tascam, as well as the TR8S. So the TR8S has a separate channel for the kick drum, and then the entire other group or output is all of the other drums. Okay, so we've talked about gear, we've talked about a little bit about the routing. Before we get into the DAW, I want a quick conversation about how I got here. Like a quick origin story, I suppose. I had some MIDI gear and I was wanting to play live. And, you know, I had a keyboard. I had this massive knob board that I bought in college. It's the HybriDAW Bitstream Pro. I still have it. Let me show it to you. We can have a whole nother intro to this thing if anyone ever wants to see it. So I had the original launch pad. I had a Korg Nano Control, which has 9 faders and 9 knobs and some transport controls on it. What else did I use? The HybriDAW I had mapped to a bunch of special effects and things inside of Ableton. I then wanted to incorporate like a groove box or a synth or something. So I have this. So this was, oh, I just realized you didn't hear me when I brought the HybriDAW closer. Yeah, so I'm going to re-show that on the camera. So this is the HybriDAW Bitstream Pro. Still programmable, still usable today, but not replaceable. But it's, you know, a fantastic piece of kit and rack mountable. But anyway, I was using this for a good while. But I wanted to add a synthesizer or a groove box or something. So I had the Korg ER1 and I have the EA1. I bought them off of a really good friend of mine, and he regrets it every time he brings it up. I put this in my set. So I had a little MIDI routing box, like one of the first MIDI Sport USB routing boxes, and got it all hooked up, and I was doing, you know, more live drum type stuff and patterns and whatnot. But, you know, still kind of doing the sample management and playing the melodies through exported samples and things like that. And then applying, you know, effects all over them and kind of bringing things in and out. And it's really kind of like a, you know, advanced DJ set, right? So that's kind of where I started with figuring out how to do all this stuff live. So we've had all these advancements in software and synthesizers and MIDI gear, and this is where we're at. So I made a decision at one point to say, okay, I would like more live interactivity. I would like more, you know, playing on the keys and, you know, doing sound sculpting and, you know, playing with the ADSR and the filters and the LFOs live. Now, on a synthesizer, most of them, not all of them, but even on these Korg Volcas, you have physical controls that allow you to sculpt sound. And your sound sculpting, while, you know, limited to the character of that particular device, is right there. You know, I know this is my filter knob, and I know I've got 3 VCOs I can play with to kind of change the character of the bass line. You know, I know how the Volca keys makes the sounds I want to make. You know, the FM is set up the way I want it, and I can do some tweaking live right there. You know, all of these, right? including the TR-8S. It's the same thing. Like you've got these performance controls up here for tuning the drum part. You know, you've got decay, and then you've got a mappable button that could be for special effects or sending things, you know, to a filter and sculpting the sound live. So I wanted more of that, and I thought, okay, well, the only way to do that is to get hardware, right? And it's kind of where I was dabbling with the Volcas, and then realizing very quickly that I still enjoy VSTs. I still enjoy being in the DAW and creating sounds that way too. So I thought, gosh, you know what? There's got to be an opportunity here to do something that's kind of combined. Like there's this movement of being DAW-less and getting away from computers and Ableton and Reason and Logic and just going all in on hardware. That's totally cool. Like I mad respect for people that do that, but that wasn't my jam. And then you have, you know, the opposite end of that, the DAWful, which is, you know, maybe some MIDI control stuff, but everything is generated by the computer. And that's cool too, right? But I kind of like both, and I want to be able to do both. Let's look at this from the hardware perspective first, in terms of like the MIDI layout. And then I think it'll make a lot more sense when we dive into Ableton Live. So hang in there. Those of you who are Ableton users and, you know, you're familiar with this kind of gear, maybe you've heard of the paradigm of 8. 8 devices, 8 controls, 8 tracks, 8 lanes, 8 volume sliders, 8 knobs, right? You know, grids of 8. Well, thinking about it that way, I kind of wondered where my mental space was limited in terms of how much I could really touch and do in a studio setting when I'm just jamming. And as it turns out, 8 is a pretty healthy number when I use groups of 8 to manage what I'm working with. So this Launchpad Pro on the left of me is dedicated to the view in Ableton Live of the hardware loops, right? So I've got, you know, stuff that I'm working on in active tracks with, you know, loop pieces here. And these are all record enabled though. So when I'm performing live or jamming in the studio or noodling around with ideas, I just, you know, tap on one and I can play in the piece, and then I can go back and, you know, do editing and all kinds of stuff. But this launch control represents the 8 hardware voices. This Launchpad Pro is double duty. It does 8 software voices, but it also does, way over on the other side of the set, the 8 kind of legacy sample voices. So back when I was performing in samples, I pretty much included that as part of my set because I like to pull from that sometimes for, you know, scratching my own itch of wanting to play a song that I wrote a long time ago. You know, it's performance. So I'm grabbing, you know, that vocal hook or that, you know, synth line that I'm not committed to reproducing the specific sound that kind of identifies that song, goes in the sample tracks. So this one it represents the software voices, VSTs, plugins, etc., and the sample voices. And this one's the hardware voices. So we have 3 lanes or 3 groups of 8 voices: hardware, software, and sample. So that's how these launch pads are used right now to help manage the process of recording and playing back things live. So let me show you what I mean in Ableton Live as we kind of look at the Ableton Live set. I'm going to move the camera right back there. Oh no, what is that on my lens? Well, that was terrifying. That was on the back of the lens. So I had to take the lens off the camera and clean it. So yeah, that was not cool, man. Where were we? What was I talking about? Oh, we're going to share the Ableton Live set. Okay, so welcome to the Ableton Live set that I've got. And this is going to be a very quick tour. anything that you want to learn more about, definitely post down in the comments. Ask me anything about this stuff. I'm more than happy to, make additional videos on or share with you, in a conversation, either in the comments or over social media or something. All right, so groupings of 8. You can see here we've got 8 channels, and these 8 channels are the inputs from the Tascam Selasonic US 2020 interface. So here's the Volca sample on channel 1, the IK Uno on channel 2, the first part, or part 1 of the Electribe EA1, and then it also has a part 2 output, so that's channel 3 and 4. The Volca keys on 5, the bass on 6, the FM on 7, the strike fed on 8, and my computer is being very slow because I'm recording OBS and doing this at the same time. Next, we have a grouping of 8 for the software synths. Now, in my case, I'm a huge fan of Reason. I've been using Propeller Head Reason, now Reason Studios Reason, since it came out. And I've been a huge fan of it. I've learned a lot of what I know on it, and it actually helped me understand how synthesizers work, because that's what it does. That's what it emulates. It emulates real hardware. So I was able to understand, what I was looking at when approaching, big keyboard synths or little desktop synths like this for the first time, now quite a while ago. But yeah, so the reason I bring that up is, I think all of these right now, except maybe one, are Reason VSTs. So these are the software synths. So I've got, subtractor synths and the Viking and some organs and some sample stuff and some pads and a bass. These kind of change out as I've been, fine-tuning everything and looking for specific sounds that I want to reuse or be able to mold and sculpt and repeatedly put into projects. Probably just the bass, or the first 4, the bass, the subtractor, this organ, and the Viking. Those are probably set. The other 4 are kind of in flux, but you don't need to know that now, so there you go. And then we scroll this way in this really big set. Man, my computer is struggling. Gosh. Then I have a block of things that are marked. You see these unused here. That's because I needed to keep things in groups of 8. And in this case, because I have the instrument audio here in a group, I needed to add some fillers, and then I've been using them for other utilities, such as this Quant Circle, which is a wonderful little Max for Live patch that somebody made, which I need to do a video on because it's incredibly useful. And that's what I use to give me a visual feedback. Oh, you can't see it. I'm on top of it. Let's move me out of the way. Whoa! No, wrong way. This is the Quant Circle. This allows me to have a visual representation of quantization as it's happening, and I actually have mine set to a very generous 2 bars for sample start and stop. So if we go in here in instrument audio, we can see my computer continue to struggle. These are not record enabled because I record the MIDI. So if we go back in here, back to the first ones, these are MIDI tracks, right? So I'm recording what I play through the Arturia key step, and that's what loops, the MIDI, not the actual audio from the instrument. And that's because I can then go and sculpt the sound or change parameters on the synthesizer itself, rather than being locked into a repeating loop of what was recorded, and it's just audio that I affect. But this is the audio input from the Tascam US 2020 Selasonic interface, all grouped together. And then we get to the samples, the legacy samples, and it's kind of a mess right now because I change them around based on, what I haven't played in a while, what I think I'm going to play, etc. So, various samples related to tracks of mine. Yeah, and maybe I'll do a demo of that at some point. But that is largely what we have here. Now, there are additional things I'm working on, ideas around, filter automation, build-ups and teardowns, things like that, that provide group control of, multiple instruments or multiple voices, to help with that kind of performance, give and take, because it's really, obviously it's difficult to be one person managing all of these things and, building an interesting sounding sound palette, to work with and present to people. My computer's having some issues, and because I need to restart, I'm just going to have to pick this up on another recording session. Oh, man. Can't do it all at once, right? But use the time you have. But you won't know. I'll be right back, like right now. All right, the next thing and last thing I want to talk about is how touchosc works with these launch controls. So the iPad running touchosc works with these launch controls to give me visual feedback and physical control of software synthesizers, or VSTs, in Ableton Live. So you'll see here we've got a bunch of information on the screen, and this touchosc layout is kind of the same across all the pages. The general idea I have is I have, maybe send A, send B, sometimes a send C under here, controlling effect sends. These are volumes for each channel, whether we're in hardware or software. And then we have these kind of knob looking values here. And this is what I want to talk about. This is the visual feedback of the settings for a given plugin or VST in Ableton Live. So if you see down here, we've got the magic hand right there for the instrument rack, and we've selected the mono bass. So on the launch control, these 8 buttons are looking at each of the 8 tracks in a particular view in Ableton. The magic box, which you see here, the green one right here, that's the Launchpad Pro. I don't have the magic boxes enabled for the view on the launch controls because they don't move. I move them to where I want them in the set, and then I leave them there. So here's the mono bass, here's the Viking, here's a subtractor, here's some organ sounds, etc. Now, if you see right here, these are updating as we change devices. So these are the macros for the mono bass, macros for the subtractor, macro controls for the Reason organ VST or keys thing, and the Viking. These aren't macros, these are just the parameters selected for MIDI control for that particular VST. And that continues on for whatever we're looking at. So to show you what this sounds like, you can see here this knob on the launch control is set pretty low, right? But the filter here on the Viking is actually up pretty high. Well, these are in takeover mode, so you have to turn this knob to the visual feedback here. So I know to turn it up about this far, and I start taking over the control of it. And now I can control the filter of that Viking, which I believe is this one. Right? So I can do that with any of the controls here. So here's the release. And we can go over to the bass, and now I can look at the bass here, and this one. So I sweep this knob down to pick up the filter. Now I have control of it. Same with the release. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what gives me control and the visual feedback I need to know what the settings are for any instrument I want to configure in Ableton Live. Anyway, yeah, that's how I do this. Now, if we move over to this launch control, it's is equally as important, but this one is auto map based on what you look at in the DAW. This one is not. Currently I'm using the user mode, so I am hard assigning the MIDI to do something specific. So if we look at the mono bass that's selected right now, each knob of this one controls the quantization length for loop recording. So when I start recording a loop by pushing one of the buttons on the grids of the Launchpad Pros, it will be set to a specific length that is controlled by this plugin right down here called Clip Length Recorder. And I've actually modified this one to only provide a specific set of values that are then mapped to the full rotation of these knobs. So I know that, for instance, this device, channel 9, instrument 9, is this bass we're looking at. So if I rotate this, you can see the clip length change to 1. That means I have 1 bar to play in notes, and then it'll start looping. And I know this is 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16 bar options. And that's true for all of these. You know, for instance, if I figured something out while I'm jamming or here in the studio and I go, oh, it's 8 bars, you know, 8 measures, whatever. I'm going to put this to 8 and then I'm ready to record. Okay, so let's do a little show and tell to show how this kind of works together. We're going to have a basic beat off the TR8S, a nice little organy pad thing that we're going to filter sweep up by selecting its track and using the filter on this launch control. Then we're going to set up for recording a bass line. So I'll need to probably change the record quantization loop length and just check my settings look good for the bass. And then we'll re-trigger a sample. It goes over here on the keys. So here I can change effects of things like the vocal keys. So that's a verb and delay. So that's kind of the idea, being able to get visual feedback and have physical control of the software, so you don't have to touch the computer, but you can still use voices from software or however you want to set stuff up. So yeah, that kind of concludes everything. So I better wrap this up in an outro. All right, so that was a lot to digest, and I will definitely be making additional videos, I've already mentioned, about touchosc and what's going on with the launch controls and the custom scripting behind them for Ableton Live. But if there is anything else that you are interested in seeing or anything else you want to know more about, I am open to suggestions in the comments, and I would love to show you this stuff and just show you one of the many different approaches that are out there on YouTube for people who produce, write, perform electronic music. So I do kind of, you know, house and techno, as you might have figured out, and occasionally some down-tempo type stuff. So the stuff I make with this system I've got going on here, whether it's live jamming or things I'm actually writing, that'll all be on Bandcamp right over here. You can get it all in my music, but then I'll also be going back into the DAWful mode and pulling out some projects that were entirely in Reason over the last like 10 years. So I think there'll be some fun stuff to do there too. And a lot of that is going to be recorded on here on a camera so that you can kind of see the process and come along for the journey. So if any of that interests you, like, subscribe, and definitely get at me in the comments, and I look forward to it. So thanks again. Thanks for hanging on for this really long one. I don't think we're gonna have to do one of these for a while. And yeah, I'm excited for the next videos, and I hope you are too. So thanks, bye. Oh my God, I'm actually doing this. Finally doing this. Hope I don't mess it up. All right, what's going on YouTube? Sliptide here, and I'm fiddling. Dang it, lens cap. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Sliptide here. How's it going, everybody? Sliptide here. So first, I'd like to just cover what's out on the desk. The major, it is the, man, it's the end of the day. I want to do that again. So let's look at this from the hardware perspective. So last week I tried to use the USB audio TR8. Everybody. How's it going, everybody? Let's go with good, everybody. All right. Again.